Good afternoon, everybody. I would like to, on behalf of the UK, to welcome the UK ambassador, Ian Cameron-Cliff here for the first time at the UK. He's visiting, maybe a little bit late, but we will keep the presentation of about 20 minutes, and we'll engage on a question and answers we always do here. And we are in a very good day here today because we got the progress report yesterday that shows the progress or the lack of it of Kosovo in this, but then we have to see from a different perspective also, because what kind of opportunities Kosovo get from EU? We don't have a contractual agreement with EU, although majority of the countries of EU have recognized Kosovo, but Kosovo is not getting the fair share, I guess, from EU in order to really benefit from this integration process that the other countries are doing. As we know, we are the only country in Balkans and in Europe we don't have visa liberalization. So is EU really helping us to be integrated, or we have to do all our work and then be really evaluated, maybe unfairly sometimes? But for this and many other discussion points that we'll talk today, we have the ambassador here. Without any further ado, I'd like to introduce him to this floor. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, and good morning. Well, it's a great privilege to be here, and as the director just said, it's rather apposite that it's the morning after the EU progress report on Kosovo. So let me just say a few words about that and then look at the wider picture. I think that the Kosovo progress report is a very thorough exercise. I've only been here for 7 months, but people tell me that it's rather more detailed than earlier progress reports. And certainly the British government will be urging the Kosovo government to study the progress report very carefully and focus on the areas where further reform is required. Secondly, we welcome the Commission's very specific points, the plan to launch a visa dialogue with Kosovo towards the end of the year. We always have to be a bit careful in Britain what we say about visa dialogue, because of course it doesn't apply to us, it only applies to the Schengen countries. But we think that the launch of visa dialogue is something for which Kosovo government has actually worked very hard in recent months, and so that's a big plus. And also we welcome the proposal by the Commission to launch a structured dialogue on the rule of law, and I will return to the importance of the rule of law a bit later on. So anyway, I think those two things, those two nuggets, are important steps towards the goal we all share in the EU, recognisers and non-recognisers alike, the shared goal of EU membership for Kosovo. The British government also welcomes the Commission's intention to review its 2009 communication, and we are urging the Commission to continue to make efforts towards implementation of the remaining recommendations from 2009, notably those concerning trade. And I have to say we're disappointed that the progress report doesn't refer to enhanced trade relations between the EU and Kosovo. But at least the subject of the autonomous trade measures is before the European Parliament, more or less as we speak. I'd also like to stress that I think the Kosovo government's response so far to the progress report has been measured and well considered. And I note in particular Minister Chitaku's comments that the visa dialogue is one of the biggest achievements since Kosovo's independence, and that the report reflects the real and factual situation. It's a warts and all report. I would also like to highlight, as the British ambassador, the work that the UK is doing, both through DFID and through a range of embassy projects, to support Kosovo in some of the key areas that are actually highlighted in the progress report. For example, public administration reform, where there is a very substantial DFID programme, the issue of returns, where we have worked for the first urban return of Serbs to the historic centre of Prizren, a lot of support for the Ministry of Finance, and some work we're doing on things like gender and women's rights, which are also flagged up in the report. So those are just a few preliminary thoughts on the progress report, and I'm very happy to talk in more detail when we come to the question and answer session. But I think it's also important to stress that the Kosovo perspective of the EU is a big picture question. Sometimes people get lost in the weeds. And let me stress that not only for Britain, but for all the countries of the EU, the integration of the whole of the Western Balkans, including Kosovo, into the EU, and indeed ultimately into NATO as well, is a strategic decision. And we won't resolve from that. I know there's a lot of talk around the place about enlargement fatigue. I think it's more marked in some of the other countries of the EU than in the UK. There are reasons for that we can go into. But I think that when it comes down to it, all the countries of the EU know that the strategic goal of stabilising the Western Balkans for, not permanently, nothing is permanent in this world, but for the foreseeable future, it is in integrating the whole region into the EU, and I don't think that should be forgotten. Now, the directors referred to some of the frustrations. There are very particular frustrations for Kosovo, and I know that one of them does relate to the 5 non-recognisers in the EU. How can you join the EU when you've got 5 countries in there who don't recognise Kosovo as an independent state? And that is a very knotty problem. There's no getting away from it. I mean, we in the UK feel we're doing our bit on this. We talk about the importance of Kosovo and ultimately moving towards recognition regularly to all the 5 non-recognising states in the EU. As I think some of you know, we have a project which we've developed with the British Council and the Foreign Ministry here to take a strategic approach to securing more recognitions. That's gone quite well if one looks in the wider world. We've just had Kuwait. But also that strategy looks at how we can influence civil society, political parties and others in the 5 EU non-recognising states. We know that the reality is that these countries aren't going to change their minds overnight, but we need to work away at getting across the message about why recognition of Kosovo is so important for the future of Europe as a whole, as well as the future of Kosovo. Another point I'd make is that, perhaps this links in with the point about the non-recognisers, is that in looking at the issues on the table at the moment in this progress report and more widely, Kosovo needs to think about implementing reforms, harmonising legislation with the acquis communautaire, adopting EU standards, not only because eventually you want to join the EU, but because that is the right thing to do for Kosovo anyway. I think this is a point that's actually been captured rather well in your neighbouring smaller country of Montenegro. I think they have got the message very well. A lot of Montenegrin diplomats have said to me, we understand that this isn't just about joining the EU, going through the motions in order to join the EU. This is about reform of the administration, reform of the economy, because that is in Kosovo's long-term interests in itself. And some people would say that progress on all these aspects of the acquis communautaire is actually the best argument for Kosovo to present to the non-recognisers about why it deserves to be taken seriously and ultimately recognised and brought into the EU family. And another point is that, you know, if you only look at these issues so that you can eventually join the EU, you will be very tempted to go in for what we call in Britain box ticking. In other words, you pass a piece of legislation and say, hooray, we've done that, and then you don't do anything about it. You don't implement it. I think that passing legislation which is EU compliant and then really implementing it in difficult areas like reform of the judiciary, really tackling corruption, that needs to be done anyway for the good of Kosovo, to develop Kosovo as a modern European state. Then there's another frustration that you have here, which has been really emphasised to me over the last 7 months. I mean, one of the reasons I was sent here rather without much notice after a rather long gap after my predecessor had moved off to be Deputy Head of EULEX, one of the reasons why the British government was absolutely determined to have an ambassador in place by March was because we wanted to underpin the Belgrade-Pristina dialogue. And I really can't emphasise too much how important that is for the British government. We see the Belgrade-Pristina dialogue as the first stepping stone towards resolving all the outstanding issues that exist, not only between Kosovo and Russia, but Kosovo and Serbia, but also to getting countries like Russia to reorientate their stance. Again, it's a very long-term thing, but I know there's been a lot of stuff in the press and Parliament here about the Belgrade-Pristina dialogue being something that you're being forced to do for the benefit of Serbia, that it's not really in the interests of Kosovo. I must say, I think this is an absolute load of rubbish. And I think what we've seen now shows that it's a load of rubbish. There is a great deal on the agenda of the Belgrade-Pristina dialogue, which of course is facilitated by the EU. That's where the EU comes in. There's a great deal which is really crucial to the future of Kosovo and its people. I would highlight in particular the issues about freedom of movement, enabling people to travel to Serbia and beyond, the things particularly about the customs stamp, where, and I think this is one point that the progress report perhaps doesn't bring out, that one of the economic difficulties you face in Kosovo, one of the difficulties I face in encouraging British companies to invest in Kosovo, is that it is very difficult to export northwards from Kosovo by any normal route. And that is because Serbia has totally illegally breached its central commitments by blocking your exports, by refusing to recognise the Kosovo customs stamp. And I think that in terms of the dialogue, the Kosovo customs stamp, the recognition of that Kosovo customs stamp is absolutely crucial. Now you will all say to me, but we've got a certain amount of progress in the dialogue, but it's not being implemented. And I think it's quite clear which side is more guilty about non-implementation. Robert Cooper has been very clear about that. It is Serbia that is prevaricating about implementation. But what I would like you to focus on is the fact that same day as we have the Kosovo progress report, we of course have the avis, the opinion of the Commission on Serbia's application for candidate status. And I think that one thing that is very clear, and I think is very good in that avis, is that it really spells out in detail Kosovo-related conditionality for Serbia to get its candidate status. Really detailed stuff about implementation of the existing agreements in the dialogue, further work on areas like energy and telecoms, which have been on the agenda but haven't been dealt with because of all the delays. And I think that it really ought to be a reassurance for people in Kosovo, A, that the dialogue is worth it, and B, that Kosovo-related